All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, and hold on, let me just do this one. So Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Yesterday, we were actually doing this ayah right here, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu la taqatulu as-sayda wa antum hurum. And we talked about al-ihram. We talked about some certain details in regards to these ayat, or to this ayah at least. And one thing, of course, we still didn't do is go back to Tafseer al-Qurtubi to give us some details. But because the details are too many, I thought it would be important to summarize these details and just give you an idea, at least, on some of the different matters that are discussed so that we can educate ourselves on what issues we need to seek, let's call it fatwa consultation, an Islamic consultation when needed, and if such things were to happen. And let's see, al-Qurtubi said that in regards to this ayah, that there are 30 different matters that he basically discussed, and certainly the scholars of fiqh had discussed in relationship to this ayah. So he said, when you're looking at Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, he said that this discourse or such a wording is basically inclusive and a general statement for every single Muslim, whether this person is male, whether this person is female. Let me just bring a further comment on the part of what, even if it's a female, because I've seen some people think that the Quran is directing the wordings to men and to the masculine pronoun, and therefore women are not included. This is actually, unfortunately, a misunderstanding, and certainly this is lacking ilm in Lugha Arabiya, because in Lugha Arabiya, the masculine pronoun could be more of a pronoun that is an inclusive pronoun of men and women. So to think of it as it's only directing to the wordings to the men is inaccurate, and is basically coming from being ignorant about the structure of Lugha Arabiya. Now, that's why in the Quran, of course, when this was misunderstood as well, probably by, let's just remember this ayah, 132, and we're just going to go really quick to Surah Al-Ahzab. With Surah Al-Ahzab, it was basically giving them this clarification that no, men and women are basically included in all of this, and it's not necessarily just to let the men feel that this is including them, but this is including every. It's my daughter actually putting the cat, and it's like, what? And she's laughing about it. It's like, what's so funny? What's so funny? It's just distracting me. What's so funny? Okay, here we go. All right. Inna al-Muslimina wal-Muslimat. This was the ayah that was revealed when Salama had also wondered whether all the statements were directing it to men and women, or whether it was directing to only the men. And that's why this ayah was revealed to basically respond to such confusion, and said, Inna al-Muslimina wal-Muslimati wal-Mu'minina wal-Mu'minat wal-Qanitina wal-Qanitat, and basically using the pronoun for directing at masculine pronouns and feminine pronouns, and basically in order to say that this is actually inclusive to all, and is not necessarily just women or just men, but it's inclusive to both men and the women, the Muslim men, the Muslim women, the believing men and the believing women, the qanitin, the qanitat, the ones that are acting in piety, the men and the women, and the honest men and the honest women, etc. So basically including all areas, and it's not necessarily exclusive to one particular one particular pronoun whatsoever. Now, this is important to keep in mind. And when we speak about, of course, when we speak about al-Qurtubi, wanted to, I guess, emphasize on this one because many times people would misunderstand the Quran, and perhaps especially during our times when people are not understanding Lugha Arabiya, they may actually get confused, and the translation does not really serve the purpose to give us a complete interpretation, a complete understanding, but it can actually be missing out on a lot of, let's say, important details such as this one, and can be sometimes confusing to some. That's why getting the ilm and making sure you're understanding the Quran through the lens of one, Sunnah, two, Lugha Arabiya, because that's the language that the Quran was sent in, is key to making sure that you're interpreting the Quran right and not interpreting the Quran based on a package of culture, on a package of probably maybe different backgrounds or probably stereotypical images that could be giving you the wrong interpretation. So in order to understand the Quran right, it's important to go back to the Quran itself, to go back to the Sunnah itself, to go back to the Lugha Arabiya, to make sure that you have all the structure together and not making your own interpretation, but making an interpretation that the Quran itself is speaking, that the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated, and that the Lugha Arabiya itself is actually speaking, and going in further details in that regards. يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا يبلونكم الله بشيء من الصيد. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is لا يبلونكم. Let's see. And what was the story around here? He said أبا اليسر, and his name was Amr ibn Malik al-Ansari. Amr ibn Malik al-Ansari, he was basically in a state of ihram during al-Hudaybiyah. When was al-Hudaybiyah? Al-Hudaybiyah happened in the 5th year Hijrah. What was the story of al-Hudaybiyah? The story of al-Hudaybiyah, the Prophet ﷺ had a dream, and that they were supposed to be going for Umrah. So mind you, the last time that there was an encounter before that date between the people of Quraysh and the Prophet ﷺ was actually on the day of Uhud. On the day of Uhud, that was the 3rd year Hijrah. Where the people of Quraysh were defeated, and with this defeat, they certainly had wanted to retaliate against the Muslims in any form or shape. So when the Muslims gathered to go for Umrah, and they wanted to make it clear that they were just going for Umrah and it was for no other, let's call it, military purpose, so they basically had taken with them the sheep, the different things they had planned to sacrifice, and put all their swords basically in a way to show that they're coming for any military or any purpose other than worship purposes. But in the middle of the way, the people of Quraysh were definitely still remembering that they were last defeated by the Muslims in the Battle of Uhud, so they wanted to retaliate. So that's when they basically stopped them in the middle of the way and did not allow them to continue their religious tourism, their religious passage, their Umrah intention, and in the middle of the way wanted to abuse the situation that they were not prepared for fighting, so they started provoking them in different ways. Part of the ways that they wanted to provoke them in was when the ambassador, which was Uthman bin Affan, was sent in order to be the spokesperson, the correspondent on behalf of the Muslims. They had basically kept him, and not only that, but spread rumors that the people of Quraysh had killed him or had assassinated him. But of course, that at that time actually meant it was an act of war. But the Prophet ﷺ, because of the provocative behavior that they were engaging in, because of course, the act of war that they were basically showing, that's when the Prophet ﷺ had basically asked the Sahaba to then pledge to the Prophet ﷺ, and with this pledge, it was Bay'at al-Aqaba. It was to pledge that they are with the Prophet ﷺ, and of course, later they were not capable of continuing their intention to do Umrah, so they basically had to break their ihram, and of course, Suhail ibn Amr was this correspondent. At the time, he was not Muslim. He was the one that was communicating, negotiating with the Muslims. He was on behalf of Quraysh negotiating with the Muslims on what would be the plan to maintain some type of a truce and maintain basically this truce and not allow the Muslims to come back this year, but come back the following year, and within 3 days do the Umrah and in and out within just 3 days, and that any alliances that are with the Muslims or alliances with the people of Quraysh, they are to be protected from both sides. And I guess the most, let's call it sensitive one, was the one that if anybody is to become Muslim from the people of Quraysh and pledge or seek an alliance with the Muslims, that the Muslims are to return them and not take them in. Now, that one was definitely very sensitive. But later on, the people of Quraysh, because these people that were, of course, these Sahaba that were becoming Muslim from Quraysh, and certainly the Muslims in Medina, that is the Prophet ﷺ, based on the truths, they were not capable of embracing them. So those groups started forming their own guerrilla groups, their own rebels, I guess, and that started coming in as a threat to the people of Quraysh, so they let go. Later on, they let go of this part in this piece of agreement. All right, so, well, this is, just to give you about al-Hudaybiyah. Amr ibn Malik al-Ansari, he was in a state of ihram for Umrah. But he had actually hunted a zebra, and that's when this ayah was revealed. وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا الصَّيْدَ وَأَنْتُمْ حُمْرٌ. So what is al-qatl? Now, I want you to just look at the word al-qatl, because oftentimes people would mistake the word al-qatl and think that it only means to kill, meaning to end the life of something. So in Lugha Arabiya, the word qatala is a lot more comprehensive than that. It can mean to quarrel. It can mean to end the life of something. So when we have a term that is or that can be comprehensive, that can be including different things, then in that situation, we would consider the context, we would consider going back to the Sunnah, we would consider a number of different qara'in, basically, different areas, whether it's Al-Quran, Sunnah, or basically the Lugha Arabiya, to make sure that we are basically referring to one particular statement and not necessarily a comprehensive or an ambiguous statement, or at least perhaps interpreting a certain word in a figurative way. We have to make sure that we put that within context. Why am I commenting on this one? The reason why I'm commenting is that while I was doing my PhD study, I basically came across a number of different Orientalists that had claimed that the word qatala in the Quran is basically an indicative that Islam is a religion of killing, a religion of terror, not understanding that the word qatala is not necessarily exclusive to killing, but it is actually including any form of disagreement, any form of a difference, etc. So it's not necessarily exclusive to literally killing. So when you look at وَلَا تَقَتُلُوا الصَّيْدَ, al-qatl here, the word qatl, the word here, qatl is to basically mean literally to kill and to end the life of something, whether we're using methods of slaughtering or whether we're using probably choking or whether it's hitting it with something, etc. Any form of ending the life of any animal, and we're speaking about hunting animals. So if a person in a state of ihram slaughtered a goat, this is not included. If a muhrim slaughtered a chicken, this is not included. This is only to speak about things that are considered as wild animals. This is not speaking of things that are domesticated animals. So just to keep that one in mind. So whoever kills an animal that is a wild animal, whether in slaughtering, and in that situation, then they have a certain expiation to pay, and that's what we're going to go in details with, but not in all complete details, just to make sure that we're not going to get into, I would say, too deep in our details and having people get lost and feel that, well, this is not relevant to me, so why should I stay and listen? So I'll just say, I'll give you heads up on certain things that probably require consultation in the future. So whoever kills a side, basically something that they had hunted, or whether slaughters it, kills it, probably sets up some kind of a trap for it to die on its own, then that is actually considered what it requires expiation. And in that situation, their expiation would basically be that they have to either, one, according to the Hanafi madhab, they considered that they would give the value in donations for what they had slaughtered. So let's say they slaughtered a deer. What are we looking at the value? Is it $1,500 or is it perhaps maybe $3,000? And for is Shafi'i and the majority, they said no, it's not the value of something, but it is to slaughter something equivalent to it. So what does that look like? So if we're talking about, let's say, an ostrich, let's say somebody that is in a state of ihram hunted an ostrich. So then in that situation, would we necessarily get something that is at least, let's say, equivalent to its shape, to its appearance, or to its price? What are we looking at? That's the place of differences of opinions. So do we consider an ostrich, long neck, something that runs, etc.? Should we consider something that probably is within the same structure as perhaps a camel? What are we looking at? That's the area of differences of opinion. So I'm not going to go in details with that. Or do we consider, for example, if we're talking about a deer, do we consider a goat, or do we consider a sheep, or do we consider a camel? What is equivalent to it? From what? From innam. What is innam? Innam is basically camels, sheep, goats, or cows. Those are enough. So in other words, something equivalent to it from these categories of animals. So just to give you an idea, al-madhhab al-Hanafi is the main madhab when it comes to zakah, when it comes to even when we're speaking about different types of expiation, perhaps even when it comes to zakat al-fitr, and here you could see even when it comes to an expiation foresight, they did actually consider the value, but that's basically in opposition to all the other madhahib. Al-madhab al-Hanafi was the main madhab that always had considered that it's the value. It doesn't matter on what type of material that you would donate and what is necessarily an equivalent material, but it's the value of it because that's what matters. So that's basically in zakat al-fitr, that's in also in the expiation for yameen, that's also in a number of different areas. They always considered that you can give the value. And for the other madhahib, no, they were really strict and said that is not what the wording is saying in the Quran, and therefore we should stick to the actual wording and not give any form of a self-interpretation, and we're really strict on the actual wording that specified the type of expiation, the type of value and how the value is actually given right there. So let's move on with the different points. You could see I'm going to be skipping a lot because this is rather, I would say, a very rare situation. So I'm assuming that if I were to go in lots of details with their evidences, I'm assuming that a lot of sisters would probably get lost and probably feel that it is irrelevant in some ways, because I'm sure none of you are going to go hunting, okay? At least maybe Sister Umayya, I could see she loves hunting. Okay, let's say point 4. He said it is impermissible for a person that is in a state of ihram to slaughter whatever was basically caught in hunting, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had forbidden a person to basically hunt or even kill what was hunted. Let's see. So what is the question here? What is the question here? Can the person, let's say someone else hunted a deer, okay? And let's say the person that hunted the deer was in a state of ihram and he slaughtered this deer. Let's say with us were some people that were not in a state of ihram, but the question is, this muhrim person that slaughtered the deer, is the actual slaughter halal or haram? That's the question. So this muhrim wasn't supposed to slaughter. There's no question about that. This person in a state of ihram was not supposed to hunt, was not supposed to slaughter. But the question is, what if we have along with us a person that is not a muhrim? Is that animal that was slaughtered, that was hunted, is it halal? Is it a dhabiha? Or does it not qualify for a dhabiha? That's the question. Okay, so you had some scholars consider that no, it is not a dhabiha, and therefore it would be haram to consume this animal because, one, it was basically considered within the group that was hunted, that was slaughtered by someone that does not qualify to be a person that slaughters. So what does that look like? Well, that looks like exactly if I were to have a person that is a Hindu, even though a Hindu doesn't slaughter, but well, they do slaughter for their gods. But if it was, let's say, a Hindu, or let's say any other faith other than the people of the book they were to slaughter, we would say that that slaughter was not going to qualify as a dhabiha. So you had, for some scholars, like right there, you had some the Shafi'iyya, they considered, the madhab Shafi'i, they considered that no, the actual slaughter is fine, but he's at sin for slaughtering. But the other madhab, they considered that no, this person does not qualify exactly like any other non-Muslim, or at least non-Muslim / non-Kitabi, were to slaughter. Same thing, that this Muslim that is in a state of ihram was not qualified to be a person to slaughter such an animal. So just wanted to see the debate right there. First group, they basically said that it is considered a dhabiha. The second group, they basically said, well, so right there, the Malikis, they said, well, no, he's basically not qualified to do the dhabiha, and therefore we cannot consider this as a dhabiha because it was done by the wrong person, a person that does not qualify. Okay, so just wanted to mention this point and summarize it as much as we can. And I want you just to see, how they're intricate and really detailed and considered. Is it a sin, or does that mean they're not qualified to do the biha? And does that mean that that animal is basically considered a biha, therefore halal to consume, or is it not a biha and therefore not halal to consume? So, and of course, the other opinion considered that no, the person is at sin for slaughtering and for hunting, but the actual slaughter itself is not haram to consume, at least on somebody that is not in a state of ihram. All right, let's go for point number 5. When we're speaking about the word sayd, what is the word sayd? So the word sayd, the root is sada. Sada. So when you're looking at the word sada, that basically would be an inclusive term to mean any type of a hunting, whether we're speaking about hunting within the wild or whether hunting within sea animals, until, of course, the ayah was basically clear to say that صيد البر حرم عليكم صيد البر ما دمتم حرما, that what was considered as haram is basically the hunting in the wild, and not necessarily what was considered as hunting in sea animals. So sea animals are not included. And he said, فَأَبَاحَ صَيْدَ الْبَحْرِ إِبَاحَةً مُطْلَقَةً. He said, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in general had permitted hunting within the sea as a general and certainly an absolute statement that it is permissible to hunt at sea, and there was nothing that basically had forbidden to hunt sea animals in any ayah. In fact, there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ had generally said, الطهور ماؤه الحل ميتته والطهور ماؤه, that الطهور الحل ميتته, that anything that is basically from the sea animals, that it would basically be halal, and the water itself, that the water itself is basically pure, and that even the animals that were dead. And we're not talking about dead animals that are starting to decompose. So we're not speaking about animal sea creatures that are starting to decompose, meaning they're floating and so forth. But this is actually talking about sea animals. Probably we've got a fishing net, and within the fishing net, we're getting all these types of sea creatures, and we don't know whether some of them were probably killed before or not, but all we got was all this whole fishing net that combined to us probably maybe hundreds of sea creatures. We don't really know which one was alive, which one was bitten, which one was this. So in the end, these sea creatures are all considered that they're all halal. You don't have to classify which one was dead and which one was not, unless it was floating and starting to decompose. That's a different situation because of health matters. Let's see, when we're speaking about, I guess, wild animals, what does that even look like? What are wild animals? So scholars actually had differences of opinions on what really defines a complete wild animal. Are we just talking about carnivores? Or are we talking about herbivores that are in the wild? What are we really talking about in terms of wild animals? So animals that are wild animals, such as wild cats or probably foxes or probably hyenas and things like that. And in those situations, do we consider that that is as hunting that is not allowed, or what do we really understand of all of this? This is an area of differences of opinion. I'll just make the story short. And what about if we're speaking about things that don't necessarily attack? So we're speaking about perhaps a fox that's a baby fox, and is that allowed? And what if the muhrim basically kills a baby fox? Well, this baby fox is not going to attack. So killing it, is it part of protection, or what really is it? That's an area of differences of opinions between scholars. Just wanted to note that. And there's a difference, of course, between animals like a lion or a tiger or probably a cheetah, and certainly animals like snakes and scorpions, perhaps mice as well, and الحدقة, which is الحدقة is more of well, it's a carnivore bird. Maybe I could show you the picture of it. We'll show it to you in just a bit. But we're talking about, well, how do we understand that area that considers that this is permissible to hunt for safety, and that is not permissible to hunt for consumption? Is that the case? Or is it that, no, you're not supposed to be hunting, period? In other words, whether we're speaking about a lion, tiger, or whether we're speaking about herbivore animals, what was the whole purpose for not allowing you to hunt? Okay, so we're going to answer this question in just a bit, okay? Just wanted to let you know there are differences of opinions. All right, so you had the Maliki madhab consider anything that would basically attack from the carnivore animals, all of that. Then in situations where they actually killed one of these animals, then in that situation, they would basically pay an expiation for killing these animals. But if we're speaking about smaller animals, then in that situation, they would not necessarily pay an expiation. So just wanted to note on that area. Let's see for the opinion, for this opinion, when you're looking at the Prophet ﷺ in this hadith. Let's look at this hadith for a bit. So the Prophet ﷺ said, خَمْسٌ فَوَاسِقُ يُقْتَلْنَ فِي الْحِلِّ وَالْحَرَمِ. So there are 5 different things that are fawasiq. What is al-fawasiq? So al-fawasiq is anything that transgresses the limit. But when you're talking about, well, what does it look like and who transgresses the limits? So we did actually do this hadith before. And I'm going to give you, I guess, this khamsun fawasiq. Here we go. So you could actually see it. And we're going to get the image for you to actually see it. Here we go. This is it. So you could see those are the different fawasiq. What is al-fawasiq and why these particular things? So we're looking at scorpions, we're looking at hawks or crows, sorry. We're looking at mice, we're looking at dogs, and we're looking at this bird, al-hada'a, and this bird actually has a different thing to it. So what this bird does is that it basically would collect different burning twigs and then it would carry them to other stations in order to burn the area. And that's their way of hunting. That's the method that this bird uses to hunt. Okay, so you could see this hadith was basically permitting killing these animals, but then for the Malikis, they had differences of opinions in regards to crows and went in details in regards to crows, and that crows, it wouldn't necessarily be a general statement. It depends on whether it's actually harming or not. So that was the Maliki, but scorpions, for sure they're going to harm. Mice, for sure they're going to harm. In fact, most fires are actually started by mice because they would start non on the wires and then eventually start fires. And when we're speaking about dogs, we're speaking about not hunting dogs, but we're speaking about wild dogs that basically would be harming. And in that situation, just to keep this one in mind, let's go back to the hadith. So when you see the hadith is basically saying that you can kill these fil hilli wal haram. What is al-hil? Al-hil actually means when the person is not in a state of ihram. Okay, so that's al-hil. And al-haram is when a person is in a state of ihram. Hold on, what is it, a state of ihram? A state of ihram is basically when a person is intending to go for umrah or hajj, they would stop at a certain miqat. And when they would stop at certain miqat, they would start their hajj with the intention, with, of course, like what we talked about yesterday, with certain restrictions that they're not supposed to be doing, intimacy, cutting nails, cutting hair, or including, of course, fragrance and so forth. So certain restrictions that they're not supposed to be transgressing in that situation to give the sanctity of what they're intending and what they're doing. Okay, let's see. So you could see that this hadith had actually called those different creatures that we had shown you as fawasiq. So what does that mean? Well, fawasiq means that they transgress, that they, whether we're speaking about the smaller scorpion, a small mouse, does it take a different ruling than a big mouse? No, it's going to be the same thing. Same thing when we're speaking about the other creatures. So that's why that differences of opinions. Should we consider, let's say, a baby fox? Does it take the same ruling as a bigger fox? Does it take the same ruling a baby wildcat? Does it take the same ruling as a big wildcat? So that's based on that, let's say, analogy. They consider that same thing. Whether we're speaking.
So what you're saying is if it causes harm, yani that's the criteria.
So we're basically saying that the scholars and how they basically had wanted to study, are we speaking about which types of animals? Are we talking about to what extent do they basically fit in the category that this is considered hunting, this is not considered hunting? Is it permissible to kill the different animals that probably harm? And how do we understand those hadith? So what is the point? I think what the most important point here is understanding how they wanted to use these resources of a hadith and not create their own analogy. This is the most important thing I want to indicate here. I want to emphasize that you could see that it's not an issue of, well, this is what I think, and giving our own interpretation of how we feel about the matter. It's not about how you feel about the matter. This is important because we could see during our times, there is, I would say, not necessarily a conspiracy, but we could see even a lot of Muslims are really, I would say, not aware of how these scholars were going to the resources in order to create, to derive a certain ruling, and not necessarily basing it on their own personal interpretation. That's the most important thing that I wanted to get to. It's not an issue of personal interpretation. You could see that they're going to the hadith, they're creating that that debate, that argument. They're basically coming to a certain conclusion based on an argument, based on evidence, based on those hadith, and not based on personal opinion and how they feel about the matter. This is the most important thing that we want to get to. That even though it may seem like it makes sense, just killing and that, not a big deal, don't worry about it. But no, they would go back to certain evidences in order to discuss these matters and to make sure that we are going back to Quran, we're going back to Sunnah, we're going back to Lugha Arabiya, and we're not making general statements without evidences. Okay, let's see. What about things that are probably, when we're speaking about maybe wild dogs, perhaps wild dogs, maybe they're not necessarily attacking us, but let's say a baby wild dog. Does that mean that this is not included? How do we understand this? So Al-Qadi Ismail, who's Al-Qadi Ismail? Al-Qadi Ismail basically said, he's from the Maliki madhab, and I actually wanted to take you to just learn about Al-Qadi Ismail for a bit, because there were some interesting things that wanted you to learn about Al-Qadi Ismail. Let's look into Al-Qadi Ismail for a bit, right? And let's see, because this is important to learn. Let's see. I'm going to go really quick before we even share his statement. Let's go look at Al-Qadi Ismail. Okay, and what are we going to? We're going to Islam Web, and of course, Siyar A'lam al-Nubala. We know that book before for al-Dhahabi, and al-Dhahabi right there in his Siyar A'lam al-Nubala, he basically said the following. Let's look at these wordings and let's see who this person is before we would talk about him. He's al-Imam al-Allama al-Hafiz. Imam, basically a leading figure in ilm that was witnessed by a lot of these scholars. Al-Hafiz. Al-Hafiz is usually a word that they had used to basically describe a person that had memorized over 500,000 hadith. Just look at that one. Okay, let's see. He is Maliki, and he was also a Qadi Baghdad. Baghdad in Iraq, and he was there, a Qadi. What is a Qadi? A Qadi is a judge. And he was also the author of many books. He was born 199 Hijriya, and from his early childhood, he was basically a student of Talab al-Ilm. Let's see. And they were talking about the different scholars that he had taken ilm off of. Just wanted to look at this one. Abu Bakr al-Khatib, he said, quote, he was aliman mutqinan faqiha. Let's look at the word. He said he was a scholar that was mutqin. What is al-mutqin? Al-mutqin is a person that is, let's say, perfect and well versed in the knowledge and in the science that he is specialized in. He was also faqih. What's the difference between a faqih and a mufassir? So a mufassir would be a scholar that is specialized in tafsir, in the Quranic exegesis, but a faqih would be specialized in discussing the rulings, Islamic rulings in terms of basically people's behaviors. Let's see. And he said, شرح المذهب واحتج له. What is شرح المذهب? Of course, he was what madhab? He was basically madhab Maliki. And of course, you know, it's really strange how I really want to research this one because we do have different Malikis that were in Iraq, just like Al-Qadi Ismail, and we had a number of different Maliki scholars that were basically known to being the Malikis within Iraq. But right now, we don't really have Malikis, as far as I know, within Iraq, but we do have in Bahrain. In Bahrain, I don't know why and how the Madhab Maliki basically later had vanished from Iraq. I don't really know why. I still need to learn about this one, but we definitely had some Maliki scholars in Iraq. Let's see what he said. He said, صنف المسند وصنف علوم القرآن. Basically had written books in the sciences of Al-Quran and certainly had combined the hadith Ayub. Ayub is basically Ayub al-Sukhtiyani and hadith Malik. Okay, just wanted to mention this one. And he said, نشر مذهب مالك بالعراق. He was one of the main figures that spread the Maliki madhab in Iraq, and he said he has a book in Ahkam al-Quran, a book in the sciences of al-Quran, and he said no one had actually written a book as extensive as his book and went in details in Kitab Ma'an al-Quran, in the meanings and certainly the different, when we say Ma'an al-Quran, it doesn't necessarily mean just tafsir, but it's taking certain words that are probably rarely occurring in the Quran and would go in extensive research in the conjugation of these words, in the grammar, and in explaining these words, and certainly also has kitab fil qira'at. Stop right here. What is الكتاب في القراءات? When you're doing tafsir, it's not enough to do tafsir based on a general meaning, but you also have to include the variant recitations, al-qira'at within the tafsir. In other words, add that to the resources of what we use for tafsir. We said Quran itself, that is including the variant qira'at. 2, we've got Sunnah. 3, we've got Lugha Arabiya. And 4, using the different resources in what the Sahaba had explained in terms of what they had learned about the Prophet ﷺ. Basically explaining these ayat is important to make sure that we're not making our own interpretation. Why am I saying all of this? I'm saying all of this. Remember the point that I said earlier that, well, why are we going in details and talking about whether baby dogs or baby snakes or all of those are included within hunting that is forbidden on a person in a state of ihram or not? Wanted to mention that one because we're right now seeing Muslims along with non-Muslims in an attempt to kill, and I would say to end the resources. What kind of resources are we talking about? We're talking about resources, whether going back to the books, so saying that Sunnah is not an evidence that we would necessarily turn to in order to interpret Islam, is basically a method to kill out Islam. And that's what many Orientalists were trying to do, to basically and the resources that allow us to understand and interpret Islam and basically make it exclusive to your own personal interpretation. That's one method of trying to kill out the resources. The second method is by ending the relationship between Islam and scholars. So saying that al-Bukhari is not necessarily a resource to understand Islam, or saying perhaps al-Dhabi or different scholars, or probably ending the different resources and not necessarily the resources themselves, but sometimes the scholars themselves, in considering that they are irrelevant and not necessarily a considerable resource for us to turn to. And they would use a general statement saying, well, they are men and we are men, therefore we can make our own interpretation and it doesn't have to be done by these specialists. I wanted you to see these scholars and what resources they were going back to and what specialty they were going back to and what actually makes them qualified to be scholars to help us interpret this. So when we're speaking about Imam, Hafiz, we're speaking about scholars that memorize over 500,000 hadith. We're talking about scholars that memorize the Quran, memorize the variant qira'at. We're talking about specialists in Lugha Arabiya. We're talking about specialists in Sarf. We're talking about specialists in the conjugation of Lugha Arabiya, grammar, etc. This is key to understanding Islam and key to understanding the resources, and those that are specialized to understanding these resources are definitely going to be the qualified ones to interpret the religion for us, and that we, during our times, probably did not even memorize the Quran, probably don't even have maybe even the 40 Nawawi hadith memorized, let alone al-Bukhari, Muslim, al-Kutub al-Sitta, and all of that, and then would come forward and say, well, I did my own research and this is what I had come about with, and then they would present themselves like they are scholars. And this is extremely sad, because especially during our times when people can just go to ChatGPT and perhaps, AI, and think that I managed to get such information, put it together, copy pasted, and basically connected it, and asked AI to give me some form of a different interpretation. And there we go, thinking that we had right now managed to become as experts as Shafi'i and Malik and say, hey, they're men and we're men and we could do the same. That's what I wanted to get to. To me, this is more important because this is relating to our relationship with the resources, which is even more important than the actual what is it that is permissible to hunt and what is not permissible, etc., because those areas are differences of opinions. But this area, which is understanding the resources and who qualifies to be a resource, is even more important than a sin itself. Because to understand your resources, that's aqidah. That's aqidah. That's the foundation of your Islam. But to perhaps maybe kill a scorpion or kill a baby snake or etc., that would be a sin. If they would discuss whether it's a sin or not, they would have differences of opinions. But knowing your resources is aqidah. That's relating to your Islam. That's relating to you understanding what foundations you base your vision on, to make sure that you're not confusing your resources, you're not confusing your vision, you're not confusing yourself, and that you're going back to the right resources. Because the second you go to the wrong resources, that's exactly like asking some random person when you're ill to prescribe a medication for you. this random person is not qualified. So thinking that, well, yeah, those are men and those are men. I mean, what's the difference? Yeah, that doctor, he's a man, and well, so is that person on the side of the road. He's a man too. Those are different specialties. Those are different qualifications. Those are different areas. You cannot necessarily consider, yes, a carpenter is qualified to give you a prescription for an illness. If you cannot consider that person qualified to give you a prescription for an illness, then how is it that anybody that is not qualified and not specialized in Quran, in Qira'at, in Hadith, in Lugha Arabiya, going to be qualified to give you a fatwa? So when we're speaking about Islamic consultation, it's important to remember that it's not an issue of opinion. This is what we need to get to. Let's see. So Al-Qadi Ismail, he basically said, well, when we're speaking about the wild dogs, those areas of wild dogs and what they do to harm people is exactly equivalent to a snake, a scorpion, because they would be harming people, and certainly those types of birds as well, when they're harming people and basically taking, of course, perhaps people's foods or harming people and are probably harming their crops. He said that that's basically what makes them as permissible to hunt, and they would be an exception and not necessarily included in what was forbidden to hunt. Let's see. And of course, you could see they had differences of opinions then in, well, why is that particular animal or that particular insect is haram or is halal to kill, and another thing is not. Well, why would they even discuss that? And why would they discuss the reason behind it? They discussed the reasons because they were trying to figure out the analogy whenever we would get probably animals that are doing the same thing. Is the analogy, is it inclusive to other animals that basically cause the same harm or not? So that's why, let's see, that al-aqrab basically has it. I don't know if it's venom or poison, so I don't really know whether it has venom or poison. I know that there's a difference between venom and poison and what it does, but I'll just leave it at that. And for mice, because they would gnaw on different things and basically harm the different the different belongings and the different properties. They would gnaw on different items, and then whether it's the shoes or whether it's the perhaps the different utensils, they would gnaw on it, and then eventually they would ruin those items. And let's see, and for the crows, because they said because it basically starts poking and basically starting to, similar to non on different material. But of course, for the Malikis, they regarded that you don't necessarily kill al-ghurab, you don't kill the crows, and il-hada'a. I want to take you to al-hada'a because I know I didn't take you to that one. Let's see, al-hada'a, and this is al-hada'a right there. The black-winged kite. That's basically al-hada'a. No, it looks like hada'a right there. It looks like a hawk, doesn't he? Here we go. Looks like a hawk. And you know what? Let me see al-hada'a and what it is in English, right? Is it a kite? I thought it was a kite. Hold on. And let's see right there. We're going to put English and okay, gave me al-hada'a like that. No, that's not what I wanted. Okay, no. Let's see. So al-hada is basically, you could see that bird and that kite. I know it's called a kite bird. Anyhow, so why is it not permissible? Why is it not permissible? Is it because it would be harmful? So for the Maliki, he regarded that it would be not, it wouldn't be permissible to just kill it wherever you would see it, only if you were to find it harming probably the crops or harming people. That's when you would be permitted to kill it. Let's see here, Al-Qadi Ismail, coming up again, that scholar that we were talking about earlier, and he said, اختلف في الزنبور. What is a zunbur? A zunbur is basically, what is that? Hold on, let me, is zunbur, you know, it's not the bee, it's, what is that other bigger bee? What is it called? Wasp. There you go, good girl. So is zunbur is basically the wasp right there. Is it permissible? So some scholars actually said, well, it's just like the scorpions and just like snakes, and therefore it would take the same ruling. So if you got attacked by wasps, for example, that it would be permissible to kill if it attacks you. But what if it didn't attack me? What's right there, of course, the wasps won't attack you unless you would attack them, or unless you attempted to somehow harm them. That's when they would attack you. So that's why they had differences of opinions. But there's an opinion that Umar ibn Khattab had permitted killing the wasps, and certainly, well, wait a minute. Well, what about things like uh, things like when we're speaking about perhaps uh, the bed, what are those called? The bed bugs and flies and ants. Are those permissible to kill? All right, let's say. So the Maliki and many scholars actually said that it's permissible to kill all of these. So if you killed a fly, or you killed an ant, or you killed perhaps a bed bug or something like that, that's permissible to kill. It's not haram. Okay. And therefore it's not considered as hunting. Let's see Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa said that al-muhrim, he's not allowed to kill anything except a dog and a fox. Whether it basically had, whether the dog or the fox attempted to harm you or not, at the end, you would have to, if let's say the person in a state of ihram killed such an animal, that they would pay the expiation. Okay. So, but of course, he said if other wild animals would basically attack this person, then in that situation, they don't have to pay any expiation. And similarly, there's no expiation on killing a scorpion or a snake or even a hawk or even that kite bird. There's nothing on there's no expiation to kill any of these, whether they attacked you or whether you just basically went to them and just killed them. All right. And I'm just trying to go really quick in trying to, let's look at this one. For Shafi'i, considered everything that you would not eat its flesh, then in that situation, for a person in a state of ihram, he can basically kill it. So what did the Shafi'i consider? The Shafi'i considered that what was considered as Said, or what was considered as hunting, here is really exclusive to herbivore animals and not carnivore animals. So if a person, this is a wild, it's a wild dog. It's a type of an African wild dog. It looks like a hyena type of a dog. And this is what it's called in English. I don't know how to read this one. Lycoon or something like that. I don't know, so don't use my English interpretation, probably completely wrong. But this is, when I looked it up, this is what it is. It looks like an African dog. Okay, all right. And let's see, what about a rakhama? Rakhama, Egyptian vulture, beetles, ticks, different basically animals that we don't eat their flesh. And Shafi'i said this is all not included within the word aside, and therefore you would not have to pay an expiation because anyways, this isn't considered as part of hunting, period. And he said it'd be exclusive to hunting herbivore animals, and during the state of ihram, it would not be considered permissible to hunt such animals. So what about not ticks, but this is a flea, okay? And of course, this one's rather strange. So what happened with a flea? What if the person killed a flea? Okay, does that mean that you would have to pay an expiation if you killed the flea? But the flea is hurting the person. The flea is making you itch and making you do all of that. Do we basically pay an expiation for that? And that's that, I would say strange debate. So some actually considered that, well, it's because when you are taking out the flea, you're taking out hairs. When the person is taking out the fleas, then you're going to find yourself, you're pulling out hair. Okay. So then they debated whether you're really paying the expiation for pulling out the hair or whether it's for killing the flea. Okay. That one's really rather strange. I found it really rather strange to actually go into such debate. So I'll just leave it at that. Just to just to keep you within that. Let's see. The hadith, we didn't finish it before. 5 من الدواب ليس على المحرم في قتلهن جناح. 5 creatures that a person in a state of ihram, there's no sin for killing them. Hawks, al-hida'a, and al-hida'a, basically that bird that showed you that looks like a kite bird, or looks like a hawk, and scorpions, mice, and dogs. والكلب العقور, not any type of a dog. We're not talking about hunting dogs here. We're speaking about the wild dogs that are attacking people. Let's see, here's another hadith in Sahih Muslim that Sayyidah Aisha said, so you could see this hadith, one narration was by Ibn Umar, and there's another narration by Sayyidah Aisha, that the Prophet ﷺ basically said the same thing, but giving us a more detailed description here, whether the person is in a state of ihram, or whether the person was not in a state of ihram. That they could actually kill such animals. Snakes, al-ghurab al-abqa. What is al-ghurab al-abqa? So we're talking about hawks and mice, dogs, and the kite birds that we talked about. Let's see. Here's one thing. When we're speaking about hawks, just wanted to note that, how do we understand the piece about hawks, and is it every time we would see a hawk, or is it exclusive to the ones that are attacking us? And don't want to go in details with that one. Well, let's go with this one at least. وَأَنْتُمْ حُرُمْ. So the ayah is saying, oh, you who believe, do not kill what you hunt while you're in a state of ihram. So who's in a state of ihram here? Is it men, women, or is it all? It's basically men and women. And that's why he said, عَامٌ فِي النَّوْعَيْنِ مِنَ الرِّجَالِ وَالنِّسَاءِ. That it's basically inclusive to men and women. And that's basically to respond to the sisters that are thinking that the Quran is not directing its words at her, and it's only speaking to men, and that she is not finding that the Quran is relating to her, and it's only relating to men. You could see that وَأَنْتُمْ حُرُمْ, this is talking to you as a female or as a male, and whether this person is free or whether this person is a slave, or whether this person is a male, female, that they're all included with this. And therefore, this is for men and women, that they're not permitted to basically to basically hunt and whether they are man dressed in a white izar and rida, or whether it's a woman dressed in her own normal garment because she doesn't wear the izar and rida. At the end is that if you are in a state of ihram, you would be considered as included within this term. So just to note that one. What about the place? Are we allowed to hunt? Yarhamkumullah. Are we allowed to hunt not allowed to hunt in certain areas? So what if I intended to go for Umrah and I was I don't know, I intended to go to Umrah, but I was in Colorado. Wanted to hunt some, I don't know, do they have deers there, moose? I don't know what they have there, but let's just say wanted to hunt there. But I intended to do Umrah. No, you would not be considered in a state of ihram until you're actually in al-miqat. Okay, well, where's the border of the area that I'm not supposed to be hunting in? Is that to include Medina? Is that to include Mecca? Where is that border? Where is that border? So that's the question here that we'll be discussing, inshallah, tomorrow, in understanding, well, where's that border and what does that mean? Are we talking about breaking down trees? Are we just talking about just not slaughtering, not just not hunting? Are we talking about something even farther? I'll give you a hint. There are certain areas in Mecca. Is Medina included or not? Differences of opinions. What does it mean to basically be in a state of ihram? You're not even allowed to even break down trees. Wait a minute. What about twigs? We'll talk about that tomorrow, inshallah. You cannot do any form of hunting, any breaking down trees. Is Medina included? Stay tuned for more details tomorrow, inshallah. Any questions before we end, inshallah, today? I guess this is it, inshallah. And could see no one has any questions. What I'll do, what we're going to do tomorrow, inshallah. Oh, there's a big question. Is it against Sharia to wear this hijab? And should this girl keep quiet? All Sheikh, that is amounts of violating the sanctity of the house. And if she says this to anyone, different questions will be raised. Please answer after the meeting. And one thing I want to make sure, all the incidents that shared are not just part of psychosis. This is reality. These events happened. Can you talk to her psychologist? Sure. I mean, I don't mind talking to the psychologist, and even, I'm not saying that this is